Oi oi, alright. I'm Grant, this is Doodle Review, and in this episode I'm going to bring you reviews of 3 great new folk albums that I think you should hear. I think they're going to find their way to the top of many people's best of lists, which we'll be seeing in a few short weeks time because the year is running away. I actually think one of these albums could be contender for the album of the year, so let's get into it. It was the TV show The Bear that piqued my interest in Andrew Bird. His song Sisyphus, featured in the first season, was both used so well and is itself a really cool indie folk track with a whistled hook that hits as both totally unique but instantly familiar. I knew after hearing that track that I would need to take note of Bird's work, and sure enough, this year he released a new record, Inside Problems, to jump into. Almost anticipating my entry point into Andrew Bird's world, opening track Underlands features another great whistling section as the climax atop this lounge lizard meets Dylan-esque piece of chamber pop. Initially, I was really pleasantly surprised by the orchestral chamber pop leanings of this, what I was expecting to be indie folk singer-songwriter record, until I read up on Bird, who has in fact had a long career of delivering a packed discography in this very genre. And although he is a multi-instrumentalist, of which guitar is one, violin is his main instrument. Learning this fact put the whole record into context for me, as before I'd been wondering how the strings and orchestration could be both so supportive of the songs and at the same time often the main thrust of the melody. They could only be written by someone taking a strings first approach to songwriting. If I was to describe Andrew Bird's work to someone that had never listened to him before, I'd say imagine Father John Misty, but in place of the cutting, cynical, sardonic commentary is a kind of whimsical optimism, reminiscent of like Paul McCartney. This worked perfectly on tracks like Atomized with its Stop Blaming Technology refrain and slight Eastern guitar string riff. Where it can be a hindrance is on Stop and Shop, a random reggae-infused piece that bears the hallmarks of an intrusive thought that McCartney has definitely indulged to cringeworthy results many times. To his credit, Bird carries it off with a lot more style, but it still feels like a blemish on an otherwise pretty perfect record, sandwiched between the incredible pizzicato odyssey of 8 and the almost Springsteen-like climax of Closer Never Fall Apart. Overall, this is a fantastic record and one I'd wholeheartedly recommend to fans of Father John Misty, or even those that might have discovered a love for 60s and 70s chamber pop through later era Arctic Monkeys, for instance. This to me is an 8 out of 10. Great record. I Keep My Feet is the 4th album from singer-songwriter Allegra Krieger. I went into this album not knowing anything about the artist, but when I eventually did some research and learned that she is New York based, it was a proper of course moment, because even on the first couple of listens I really felt this record sits at home with that kind of 1960s Greenwich Village folk revival vibe. Joni Mitchell, who I know wasn't technically in the scene I mentioned but certainly orbited it, is actually the artist you can definitely hear an influence from, especially a song like Nothing in This World Ever Stays Still, which has an observational inner monologue vibe to the lyrics and delivery. While the core of the record is certainly Krieger's singing and playing, special mention should go to the delicate production that provides subtle but sharp jabs of ethereal synth on the opener Making Sense Of, or horns that remind me of Tom Waits at points. Horns are once again used on I Had Some to Give. Here they're simple and sparing, but really effective to underline certain parts of the lyrics, like man it's so hard to get over a tough memory. Overall, I think this is a pretty fantastic record, though at a couple of points the kind of listicle tendency of folk that I tend to struggle with, as per the aforementioned Nothing in the World. It doesn't feel like it progresses, or Terribly Free, which is a piano tune that is incredibly repetitive. They're bits that I don't enjoy as much. They're small complaints though, and in fact some songs that utilise the same tropes, like Low, where the vocals follow the guitar almost without exception and moves very little arrangement wise, is actually one of my favourites here. There have been many great singer-songwriter albums this year, but this is unique for its very vintage 60s sensibility with understated but luxe production. It's another 8 out of 10 for me. Julie Byrne is a singer and songwriter originally from Buffalo, New York, and The Greater Wings is her third full-length record since arriving in 2014. This new album arrives 6 years after her quite widely acclaimed second project, Not Even Happiness, which came out in 2017, and that's a fairly lengthy pause between releases for a new artist, much of that of course due to the pandemic that slowed almost everyone down, but sadly some of the reason for that gap lay in tragedy. While touring her breakthrough release Rooms with Walls and Windows in 2014, Byrne would meet a musician and producer named Eric Lippman, with whom she would make an instant connection with and became close friends and collaborators with. While still predominantly conceived and written by Julie Byrne, Not Even Happiness would be produced by Lippman, who made an indelible mark on the songwriter's music by introducing subtle synth textures throughout the record. These touches would prove to capture the imagination of fans and critics, but also Byrne herself, who had the intention to develop this sound on the next record that would become The Greater Wings. In 2021, during the initial writing and recording of the record, Eric Lippman sadly and suddenly passed away. Naturally, any record that would eventuate from a musical partnership being cut short so tragically would carry the weight of that loss in the lyrics and the overall vibe. But in the case of The Greater Wings, more so, as Lippman had already completed many of his parts prior to the passing, and with many of those parts being ambient, choir-like synth pads and textures, it feels like his spirit is in this record almost literally as well as figuratively. Of course, Byrne's songwriting, soft but deeply resonant vocal and perspective, is still very much the focal point of the album and very much the star on The Greater Wings. I use the word perspective because while the lyrics of course bear the loss of a loved one in all the mournful ways you would imagine, there's a peaceful, grateful and almost proud slant to her words which really cuts through. In a recent interview with The Guardian, when talking about the state of grieving, Byrne describes a feeling of unending love, and that's actually a perfect way to describe the overall vibe of this album. Consistently across almost every song we have this delicate acoustic balladry that in the moments of a song's ascension blend these string and harp and euphoric elements to create an almost heavenly state. And I say that as well, someone that I don't know what I am, but it certainly isn't religious. Admittedly, these observations and my fondness for The Greater Wings has come after spending a long time with the record. Initially, whether passively or actively listening, what I now recognise as one of the album's greatest strengths, its holistic warm bath of a sound, I confused as a bit samey and almost too relaxed even for a folk singer-songwriter. While never not aware of the beauty here, on early listens and without context of the making of this album, the songs seemed to blend together and some even felt reminiscent of others shortly past by utilising similar progressions. And that consistent instrumental ascension to the clouds that I mentioned all kind of bared repeating, but then it just clicked with me. And you know, with grief as a state of being, it's one that has multiple phases and facets and doesn't come and go like a feeling. It enshrouds you like some sort of cosmic cloud of, as Byrne herself describes, unending love. Capturing the essence of that in an album is a remarkable achievement and will no doubt resonate with listeners for years to come. For me, this is a 9 out of 10. Absolutely blew me away.